handled it. Give me an example of how you handled it well, like how you navigated this in a healthy way.
So, I mean, I've been thinking about this a little bit because of my earlier conversation with David. So one of the concerns that my parents had was that this would be a problem. This journey would be a problem from the perspective of my extended family. So we would spend holidays with my grandparents, with my aunts and uncles. Had one set of grandparents lived 45 minutes away from the other set in Massachusetts. And so we would often go for one day of Rosh Hashanah to one and one day of Rosh Hashanah to another.
I have to ask, where in Massachusetts? In the Berkshires or in?
No, one set are in the Boston area, one set in Worcester.
Okay.
And then, one Seder with one Seder with the other, that kind of thing, so that this would disrupt that. And this was a major part of our family lives. So what I did basically was I just compromised. I mean, in other words, I continued to ride, from one place to the other on Yom Tov until my last grandparent passed away in 2008, by which time I was almost 30. The only time I was concerned about the food was on Pesach. When I was in high school, I did start to bring my own food to my father's side of the family. My mother's side of the family kept Pesach well enough for me because they didn't change their dishes and so forth. That didn't go over hugely well, but everybody kept it together. And my grandmother, my father's mother, was a source of support to me in this time, even though she did not understand what was happening.
How did she provide that support? I'm just curious.
I mean, she could have gone completely crazy. And, the family was not, she had grown up in actually a sort of traditional, but not terribly religious family, but it was a Reform family in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm going to eat matzah and cream cheese on paper plates at your house on Pesach was not the kind of thing that they had any experience with, and so I had a very close relationship with my grandmother basically my whole life. And she made this work for her, which is something for which I have great admiration. So from my perspective, even though I'm sure that there were some tense moments with the extended family, I just said, look, I'm not going to make an issue out of this because I'm not going to blow this whole thing apart.
And what about you? Were those concerns, was the Shabbos and Yontif, like the travel, was that the major concern? Was the major concern just the mystery of how far this will go? What do you think was exacerbating? And how, from your own experience, do you think Adina handled these points of tension or difference?
Broadly speaking, what worries you in this situation? I'm speaking for myself now. I don't want to generalize. But, there are issues of principle and then there are issues of practicality. And maybe as a rabbi, the issues of principle, I don't know how much that might apply in a general sense. But in any case, so the practical issues are the ones that Adina, mentioned. You worry, is her observance going to disrupt our family life in such a way so that we're not going to be able to have family gatherings, celebrate holidays together, and so on, which is tremendously important to us as a family, exceedingly important to my wife and my parents and my in-laws. So the issue of kashrut on the one hand and, Shabbat and holidays, which of course is fundamental to Orthodox observance, might they play out in such a way that our family would be torn apart? I mean, I know you've discussed this on previous shows. And so those practical concerns are potentially real. And I'm, aware of families where, in fact, that is exactly what happened. So was I worried about it? Yes. Was my wife worried about it? Yes. But, I think Adina has described her approach. She was anxious to keep the family together. She was true to her beliefs, but was prepared in the interest of Shalom Bayit to bring a certain flexibility to her halakhic practice so that the family could stay together. There might be a particular case where we had tensions. My wife grew up in a kosher home. She's very proud of her kashrut.
Sure.
And took it seriously. When I was in rabbinical school, she taught Reform rabbinical students how to keep kosher because she was experienced and knew how to do it and so on and so forth. Was it a problem for her that Adina at certain points did not accept her approach to kashrut and was more stringent in her own observance? And the answer is yes. It upset her. Having said that, did they work it out? And the answer is yes. They worked it out in a way that they could, both live with. So, those are the practical issues. The principles are a different matter. I don't know if you want to discuss that now or not, but look, there were certain things that certainly worried me to some extent, my wife as well. I mean, the equality of women. It's a central defining characteristic of Reform approach to tradition, and it was also exceedingly important to my wife, both as a religious principle and as a general principle. So, one worry is, how's that going to play out? And, are we going to be uncomfortable with a daughter who in some ways is putting aside this value that is so important to us, both in Jewish terms and in broader societal and secular terms? There's an issue of social justice, which, again, central to my understanding of Judaism, important in my life, very important to my wife. There are elements of the Orthodox community for whom this tends to be more incidental and more marginal and not central to their understanding of tradition.